It's Thursday, March 14th, and I'm your host, Paula Hersey. On Barnstable Today, we talk with Town Councilor President Jim Crocker, learn more about the water quality of our ponds and lakes, and we get a primer on municipal vulnerability preparedness. Now for a look at municipal news and notes. For those of you old school who still get a newspaper in the paper form, remember to recycle it separately from mixed paper. There is a separate bin for newspaper at the transfer station. Flyer inserts that are shiny or heavy ink will need to stay with your mixed paper. Questions on what can or can't be recycled? Check out www.recyclesmartma.org and the Recyclepedia search engine. Next week, Town Council will begin to evaluate the projects in the Capital Improvement Program. Town Council President Jim Crocker shares how the Council approaches budget season. It's an off week for Town Council, but Jim Crocker's here in studio to talk a little bit about the Capital Improvement Program and how Town Council approaches this yearly annual, it's a lot of reading.
There's no off week at Town Council.
There's no off week at Town Council.
Big town, big budget, biggest on Cape Cod. It's really quite an amazing process that we go through.
So first off, let's explain, we talk about budgets all the time
Yes.
here on Barnstable Today, but the Capital Improvement Program, really what is that?
Well, the Capital Improvement Program is money outside of the operating budgets that we have to put back to provide services for our residents of the town. The priority list, as you can imagine, when you have 62 square miles, is huge, whether it's road systems, whether it's ways to water, whether it's just storm drains and building upkeep. We own a lot of real estate as well. So it's a huge demand for not enough money, as we can point out.
Right. So last week at Town Council, all of these items were read into the record. So how does Town Council now approach deliberating and understanding what some of the needs are for the Capital Improvement Program?
Well, you raised two interesting issues there. One is the parliamentary procedure with which we read them in, and one is how do we accept these in a fast read and then be prepared to speak to them. The parliamentary procedure is such that we have what's called a consent agenda. So we have had such good working relationships with the Director of Finance and, of course, our town manager, that when we see this grouping come together as a close-knit group, there have been discussions along the way to get it here. So we're prepared to move it as a consent agenda, which means you move them all at the same time to a reading in the future. The reading in the future is designed to be 30 days in the future, so we all get to pick and choose which ones we want to dig a little deeper on. The manager's made all of his management staff available to us to answer any questions, so the council is really going to do their due diligence for the next 30 days.
Right. And some of these projects you touched upon as well is that they're multiple departments.
Yes.
So speak a little bit, let's take DPW for an example, because that seems to be usually one of the larger departments that has the needs.
Yes, and they have a great procurement group, so they understand how to put these out, how to turn it around, and how to make this taxpayers' money come to work and be a project in our community. DPW has the need of assessing what is mandatory for all structures, grounds, and roadway systems. And if we're not traveling on good roads, if we're not safely getting our ambulance service, police service to the community, we've really failed at basic 101 of town services. So really it starts usually, in my opinion, it starts with the ground, starts with subsurface, anytime we talk about road runoff and or sewers, and then it goes on to ways to the water, and it goes on to structures from there. So that is an approach they take. But as you can imagine, the size of our town and the number of structures we own, number of roadway systems, they have far more projects than we have money. And so it becomes a great listing and a great discussion through management of how they analyze to make these the choices for this particular year's capital. And you could have something in capital planning this year for DPW, and they may have to set it aside because urgency brings forward a more important project.
Right. And then you talk about town property and
Yes.
structures, but we also have 2 municipal golf courses and an airport.
Yeah.
So those things are, upkeep and maintenance that not only the enterprise fund, which is different, always addresses. So how does town council approach some of those entities?
Well, the ask is always out there, and things that exceed, for instance, you brought up the airport, things that exceed the airport's actual money can be looked at as a possible way for us to take advantage of a federal reimbursement, provided that we slide a little money in that direction until the reimbursement is clear. So some of the things that our staff is so proficient at chasing, they really understand that if we ask today, we could get some type of state, federal aid, and we just have to have the matching funds until it's returned through the budget. So there's a great deal of, that's a priority too. That's how you would perhaps itemize a priority of one of those particular projects.
Right. And you talk about town councilors each taking some of these items on the capital improvement program, to do their due diligence. How do you approach that as a councilor? Is it within your precinct, or is it on the town of a whole?
Well, this is a real good working council together, and the important thing is that the councilor who is the liaison to a particular department has a clear understanding of that particular request. Usually that happens by participation as the liaison, so that you know the upcoming events and how they've been prioritized. So you either have the ability to dig a little deeper so that when other councils ask the question, you're prepared to give them good, straight answers. But as you know, the manager's always made his professional people available to us when the questions arise on that portion or their portion of the capital budget.
Right. What do you want residents to really understand about this budget process? It seems, as Mr. L says, it's a year-long process internally for the town. But as this money, it seems like a whole lot of money. People are like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of money. How do you want residents to really look at this? How can they get involved and understand how this works?
Well, they have to be grateful, really, that the manager and his staff are so proficient at understanding the problems in our community that they continue to reevaluate the priorities. I think that will always provide us safety and assurances to the residents. But you also have to be patient for that regard, because you can have your projects drop from a higher level priority to being displaced by something that has a more pressing issue for the public. I personally have been working on the Bay School since '09, so I'm 10 years out, and we're still chasing funding in one of my pet projects, but I actually acknowledge every time it gets there, and I acknowledge every time that it has to be displaced by another pressing problem. So there's just not enough money for everything we would all like to see done for our village and for our community, but we take them one at a time, and we handle the priorities.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jim.
Oh, thank you. Nice to have me.
The quality of water in our ponds, lakes, rivers, and streams plays an important role in public health. Karen Malkus Benjamin, Coastal Health Resource Coordinator for the Board of Health, joins us in studio to talk about cyanobacteria, the toxic blue-green algae blooms that pose serious health risks to humans and pets. It's all about water quality these days in our oceans and in our ponds and lakes. With me today, Karen Malkus Benjamin. You are a Coastal Health Resource Coordinator for the town of Barnstable.
Yes.
It's a long title. What do you do?
So I have many facets to my job, but the main focus is that I actually follow the state bathing beach regulations and protect public health on recreational waters. And how that started was in 2000, the state passed a law that required operators of beaches to monitor their beaches and meet certain standards for bacteria that are indicators, and that was to reduce risk to the public from pathogens. 2010, they decided we needed to permit the beaches, so part of my job is actually permitting beaches and having the operators understand what that entails. And then now, in the last 5 years, we're having more concerns about other types of creatures in the water that are impacting our health. So my life has evolved.
Just like it does in the water.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's interesting, you know, there is always an enormous amount of discussion around nitrogen in our waters, and it's a huge issue for and challenge for Cape Cod as well as for the town of Barnstable. But there's other things in other waters that are important as well to public health as well as to the health of the water itself. So
Right.
talk a little bit about what might be found in ponds and lakes and streams here in the town of Barnstable.
Yeah, well, the first thing you have to think about is all these waters are not swimming pools, they're ecosystems, and they're complex organisms and plants and the physical environment that work together. So the minute we start disrupting that with whatever we're doing, whether it's just putting a lawn in or building a house or pouring things down our septic system, we're going to impact that ecosystem. So there are all sorts of things in the water, and we're encouraging them by providing them with nutrients, which are nitrogen and phosphorus. And then also some of the other things we're adding, like pesticides and herbicides, change the balance in the system. So it's very complicated. There's no one clear answer, but monitoring it and sort of keeping track of what's going on is the best approach we can take, and we get guidance, of course, from the state and the EPA. But I think that what worries me most recently are the cyanobacteria blooms that are in the fresh water.
And cyanobacteria, that's a scary word. What is it?
Well, it's as the word suggests, cyanobacteria are a type of bacteria, but they used to be called blue-green algae because they behave like algae. They photosynthesize, and during the day they produce oxygen. And so they even think billions of years ago they might have been responsible for creating our atmosphere. So they're not completely bad guys, and they're everywhere, ubiquitous in the environment. Right. You can find them in soil, in fresh water. There's some species that are in marine waters. So they're part of our world, but they are very adaptable. They've been around for a billion years, as I said. So if you give them the right conditions, they're going to go blooming. And they're not like the pathogens we measure for at the beaches normally. They don't infect you. What happens is they produce toxins as part of their basic metabolic behaviors, and so those toxins are like being poisoned. So if a dog or a child or anybody's swimming and they are exposed to the toxin, you're being poisoned. And there are many kinds of toxins that they produce. The problem is they don't always do that, and we don't know why. So what's made my job hard is sort of not being overprotective, but not being underprotective of our public. So
right.
It's a challenge.
It is a challenge, and we think about this. So the town of Barnstable has, and I am amazed, there are hundreds of ponds and lakes in our town, it seems like. I mean,
182.
It's really an enormous amount of water that has to be covered, and a lot of these are public spaces.
Yeah, that's a big problem too, because as I said, there's a law to protect bathing beaches and the permitted beaches. There are no laws or regulations about all the waters out there. There's guidance. The World Health Organization, the EPA, even our state, the toxicology department has recommendations for what we can do. But Barnstable, I feel very lucky. Tom McKean has allowed me, and the Board of Health have given me authority to actually pursue this in sort of ahead of the problem. We started in 2015 by really purposely monitoring before we're just reacting, and I think our new program is really evolving, as I said, into a way that we can anticipate blooms. And a lot of that has to do actually with the group that we're going to talk about in April, talk with in April. Nancy Leland and Hillary Snook both have trained us and we're using their research to sort of do a new monitoring protocol.
Right. So there's an event coming up on April 5th at the Harborside Room at the county in conjunction with Association to Preserve Cape Cod. This is really dedicated to this particular issue. So we always see lots of other events around nitrogen, but this is really about the cyanobacteria.
Right, especially as a health official. I mean, nitrogen is problematic to our estuaries and creates a lot of ecosystem damage and a lot of blooms and stuff, but I'm worried about people being exposed to toxins. So I wanted to, as I said, get us sort of ahead of it and learn more about it. And the program, we've been collaborating with APCC to find a way to do this that's effective and efficient for a few people to go out there and at least, start getting some information. What I'd like to say, though, is we can't get everywhere. Like you said, there are a lot of ponds, people say 182, and there's no way in one day, or even with my lovely assistants, that we could get to them all. So I rely on the public, too, to let me know if something's going on. Again, I can only really manage public areas, and a pond has many nooks and crannies, so we can't get to all of them, but at least we can, alert the public to pay attention. And I think that's really important to make informed decisions about your health, your pet's health, and your children, of course. Right. Hardest, of course, is to reach out to visitors who I don't necessarily have direct contact with.
Right. So what are we looking for in these ponds? If we wanted to contact you with a concern, what would we be looking for to give you that information?
Well, often the blooms are very obvious. They cloud the waters, and you can't, when you go in knee deep or to hip deep, you can't see your feet. So cloudy water is usually a sign. Could be other things that make the water cloudy, but that's usually a first sign. Also strange colors. They can be a bright green, a bright blue, some are even red. So colors that don't look right. Smells, some of them produce unusual smells, kind of earthy, smells like lawn cuttings or strong. If they're decaying, they even smell horrible, like you get, you want to fall over. But the big thing that people see right away are the scum lines, we call them scum lines, and they wash up on shore, and they're very brilliant colors, and again, they just don't look right. They don't belong there.
Okay, and how would they contact you with that information?
They can always call the health division and ask for me specifically. There's a web page that we have that they can contact me on. I also would invite people to be on an alert list. So for specific ponds, if there's something going on, I send out an email, or they can come back, tell me what's going on there too. I have a lot of residents who are regularly in contact with me. And what we do is we basically go out and sample the water, either just with a scoop if it's scummy, or we actually do a tow net with a plankton tow. So there are lots of ways we handle it, but visually is the first step.
Visual is the first step.
Mm-hmm.
And does this affect the growth of good ecosystems in the ponds as well? We always talk about invasive species in our lakes and ponds too, but does that bacteria actually promote other things?
It's, again, very complicated. In some cases, like the treatment, we found in, for example, Long Pond, Centerville, that the treatment for the invasive actually has encouraged the cyanobacteria, which is really frustrating and scary, because the toxins have gotten worse rather than better, and we're trying to solve another problem. So it is complicated and not very clear, direct line from point A to B. What I would say is, though, if you're seeing blooms, there's something wrong with the balance in the ecosystem. It's telling you. It's more than a canary, the elephant in the coal mine, as it were. Yeah.
Right. And then the event at the Harborside Room at the County Complex, good for residents to go, as well as people who are concerned with the environment or work for environmental?
I think everyone's invited, absolutely. Right. I think we're also trying to get a lot of townspeople, other health officials from other towns, make this a bigger Cape thing. It's a problem throughout the Cape, and the more we work together and share data. Also, the APCC is starting a new map tool that they'll discuss that will be available for everyone in all towns to use and see where things are going on, where things are actually being monitored or not, because that's good to know. Because a lot of people just assume, oh, my pond's being tested. May not be being tested. Right. But on that note, though, I want to say that individuals can do a lot to help their ponds on their own. Number one, maybe start an association if there isn't one. Pay attention to things in their own yard and in their own lifestyles that can help water quality. And a lot of that just has to do with the frontage in front of the pond, but even if you're way back, how you treat the land and what you put in your septic tank, or what you throw out or don't buy. I mean, there are things you don't need to buy that you may not need or you don't want in your water. If you don't want it in your water, don't put it on the ground.
Right, exactly. Well, I know, having worked with APCC and their stormwater program, their storm drainage, there's lots of things that go down that drain that people out of sight, out of mind. And it's really, I think, up to all of us to maybe make a conscious effort of what we're putting down the drain or down the toilet or down our driveway when we wash our cars.
Absolutely, and what we put on our lawns and on our bodies, too. I mean, there are all sorts of choices, and it's up to each person, but each person does make a difference. Sometimes people think, oh, it's not up to me, the town will fix it or the county will fix it, but actually each of us matters. And if you do live by a pond, one of the best things you can do is plant a native buffer strip, and that just means an area that's not lawn or not open that protects stormwater or infiltrates stormwater before it reaches the water. Huge. Huge, huge, huge. And it's just simple, pretty little, doesn't have to block your view, a lovely little buffer zone. So if everyone did that, we'd be in much better shape.
Excellent. We'll have to, I think there's an event coming up that the APCC is doing on gardens as well. And I know Barnstable Clean Water is doing things like that as well. So,
Yes.
you know, if everybody takes just a little bit of time, thinks about what they're doing and makes some small changes, our waters will be much cleaner.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Karen.
Oh, thank you for having me.
How does a community prepare for the effects of climate change? Director of Planning and Development, Elizabeth Jenkins, shares the plans for a municipal vulnerability preparedness workshop. Climate resiliency is important to the town of Barnstable. With me today, Director of Planning, Elizabeth Jenkins. There's all sorts of things moving along for the MVP program through the commission. Tell us what MVP stands for. I'll make you say the whole words. And then really, there's an event coming up on March 29th, and this is really to get Barnstable on the program. So tell us a little bit about what it is and what the program is.
Sure. Hi, Paul. It's great to be here again. So the town of Barnstable was fortunate enough to be a recipient of a state grant program, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. And this is part of Charlie Baker's $300 million initiative to address climate and coastal resiliency issues around the state of Massachusetts. So we were one of multiple communities across the state and on Cape Cod who received this grant. And it's a planning grant, so the intention is to engage communities, community stakeholders, those sort of with technical knowledge in your community, to really understand the vulnerabilities of your municipality to natural hazards and climate hazards, and then work together to develop an action plan and priorities for responding to these. So we do have an event coming up. We have it scheduled now for March 29th. It's going to be sort of an all-day immersive event. If folks are really interested in getting, again, engaged and helping to literally create the plan for dealing with these issues here in the town of Barnstable, can come and join us and participate in this workshop.
They'll be well fed.
That's correct. We do realize a one-day commitment is a substantial commitment to take out of people's time. We scheduled it on a Friday. Hopefully, some people have some flexibility around that. We will, of course, provide breakfast and lunch and snacks to sort of again keep people engaged and reflect this timetable. But this is what there's sort of a format that the state lays out that every single town that participates in this, and again there are literally hundreds of municipalities participating in this sort of formula process to identify these issues in our community and then develop again sort of a prioritized action plan of their concerns. So as a recipient of the grant, we had the opportunity to bring on a group to help us with this. It's not, because it is such a heavy lift, it's not just town staff that does all this work. So we've contracted with the staff from the Cape Cod Commission, as well as the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension and Woods Hole Sea Grant, who have been, both of those agencies, just fantastic partners in climate resilience projects with the town of Barnstable in the past. So we're really looking forward to working with them again. They're going to come in and facilitate this event on March 29th. And help us meet the requirements of this really exciting grant program.
So when we talk about identifying natural hazards and then prioritizing some of those risks, let's talk about what are some of those hazards, so people understand that if they want to come to this, this is what they're going to actually kind of think and determine.
Sure. So I think when most people think about climate resiliency, they're thinking about coastal resiliency issues. We are obviously a coastal community, and we deal with a lot of the impacts of that. So things like major storms, hurricane, and then the sort of impacts of those, coastal erosion, flooding, storm surge. Those are kind of the big ones that we get. But then there are other ones that perhaps don't get as much don't get as much attention, but present some real vulnerabilities in Barnstable. Those might be things like wildfires or forest fires. We're actually a very high-risk forest fire community. We do a lot of work with our conservation program in our natural areas to try to address some of those risks. So we're really going to look at the range of things. Again, there will probably be sort of an emphasis on coastal resiliency issues because I think those are our most prominent. But we really want to look at that full spectrum of vulnerability so people have an awareness and an understanding of it, but also because we want to, again, in our sort of action plan, be able to address the full scope of those risks.
Right. And then talk a little bit about prioritizing risks. It seems like they're all like really important. You know, when I was taught to do a to-do list, it was A1 is important, B1 not so much, C could wait to the next day, and empty the trash could be on the to-do list forever. So when you're looking at that prioritizing, you know, is it business orientated, is it economic development orientated, or is it just the coast itself?
Yeah, so the idea is that we look at these risks and vulnerabilities through multiple lenses. So there are sort of three different frameworks through which we'll do this analysis. The first one will be sort of analysis of infrastructure in the built environment. The second one through an environmental lens, and then the third one through a social lens, how it affects people and how we as a community can build our own resilience through interrelationships or response, the way we respond to disasters. So we want to take each one of these issues that our community faces and break it down and think about the risks in sort of each one of those three areas. And then that helps us to start to understand when it comes to protecting people, when it comes to protecting our environment, when it comes to protecting the structures and the investments we have here, how to start to balance and prioritize those.
Right. And you had mentioned that, you know, committees and commissions and board members that are currently sitting right now here at the town of Barnstable, this is a really good vehicle for them to do a deep dive into this issue. But what about the regular resident, the citizen that's out there and going, yeah, I got a kind of a inkling of what this means to me. Should they attend to this?
So we certainly invite anybody to register for the event. I think the broader sort of participation we can have in this, again, you know, we're not starting the conversation here in Barnstable. Coastal resiliency, climate resiliency are issues that we've talked about for a long time, but again, I think this is an important step forward in the process. So yeah, if you're just a regular resident and are really sort of interested in moving climate resiliency and coastal resiliency issues forward, this would be a great way to come and sort of learn if you don't know, or if you do know, sort of put your voice in the process. So we have information and sign up available on the Planning and Development Department website. I'm sure that's going to be announced through all of our typical channels, so look for that announcement coming forward, and then there's a site you can register on.
So they're going to register for it at the Planning and Development site. It's March 29th, and you're pretty much all day.
Pretty much all day. There'll be more specifics. If you want more specifics, you can go to that webpage and check them out. But it is a full day commitment. We understand if people can't make it all day, but you know, we ask you to sort of attend as much as possible so you can sort of see the full picture. And you know, I think it's going to be, again, sort of a great opportunity to work with our partners, some of our community and regional partners in resilience. You know, again, sort of really looking forward to their perspective and their expertise on this, and to move this important issue forward in Barnstable.
Great, this is fantastic. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Great, thanks, Paula.
Comments, suggestions, accolades? Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Email us or send us an old-fashioned note by carrier pigeon. Channel 18 works for you. I'm Paula Hersey, and thank you for watching Barnstable Today.